Chapter 10. As soon as Mr. Tall had left the stage and we'd settled back into our seats, the second freak, Alexander Ribbs, came out. He was more of a comedy act than a scary one, which was just what we needed to calm us down after that terrifying start. I happened to look over my shoulder while he was on and noticed two of the blue-hooded people down on their knees cleaning the blood from the floor. Alexander Ribbs was the skinniest man I'd ever seen. He looked like a skeleton. There seemed to be no flesh on him. He would have been frightening except he had a wide, friendly smile. Funny music played and he danced around the stage. He was dressed in ballet clothes and looked so ridiculous that soon everybody was laughing. After a while, he stopped dancing and began stretching. He said he was a contortionist, somebody with bones like rubber who can bend every which way. First, he tilted his head back so far it looked as if it had been cut off. He turned around so we could see his upside-down face, then went on leaning backwards until his head was touching the floor. Then he put his hands around the backs of his legs and pulled his head up through until it was sticking up in front of him. It looked like he was growing out of his stomach. He got a huge round of applause for that, after which he straightened up and began twisting his body around like a curly-whirly straw. He kept twisting and twisting 5 times around until his bones began to creak from the strain. He stood like that for a minute, then began to unwind really fast. Next, he got 2 drumsticks with furry ends. He took the first drumstick and hit one of his bony ribs with it. He opened his mouth and a musical note sprang out. It sounded like the noise pianos make. Then he closed his mouth and struck a rib on the other side of his body. This time, it was a louder, higher note. After a few more practice notes, he kept his mouth open and began playing songs. He played London Bridge is Falling Down, some songs by the Beatles, and the theme tunes from a few popular TV shows. The skinny man left the stage to shouts for more, but none of the freaks ever came back to do an encore. After Alexander Ribbs came Ramus Two Bellies, and he was as fat as Alexander was thin. He was enormous. The floorboards creaked as he walked out onto the stage. He walked close to the edge and kept pretending he was about to topple forward. I could see people in the front rows getting worried, and some jumped back out of the way when he got close. I don't blame them. He would have squashed them flat as a pancake if he fell. He stopped in the middle of the stage. "Hello," he said. He had a nice voice, soft and squeaky. "My name is Ramus Two Bellies, and I really have 2 bellies. I was born with them, the same way certain animals are. The doctors were stunned and said I was a freak. That's why I joined this show and am here tonight." The ladies who had hypnotized the Wolfman came out with 2 carts full of food, cakes, chips, hamburgers, packages of candy, and heads of cabbage. There was stuff there that I had never even seen before, never tasted. "Yum, yum," Ramus said. He pointed to a huge clock being lowered by the ropes from above. It stopped about 10 feet above his head. "How long do you think it will take me to eat all of this?" he asked, pointing to the food. "There will be a prize for the person who guesses closest." "An hour," somebody yelled. 45 minutes, somebody else roared. 2 hours, 10 minutes, and 33 seconds, another person shouted. Soon, everybody was calling out. I said an hour and 3 minutes. Steve said 29 minutes. The lowest was 17. When we were finished guessing, the clock started to tick, and Ramus started to eat. He ate like the wind. His arms moved so fast you could hardly see them. His mouth didn't seem to close at all. He was shoveling food in, swallowing and moving on. Everybody was amazed. I felt sick as I watched. Some people actually were sick. Finally, Ramus scoffed the last bun and the clock above his head stopped ticking. 4 minutes and 56 seconds. He'd eaten all that food in less than 5 minutes. I could hardly believe it. It didn't seem possible, even for a man with 2 bellies. "That was nice," Ramus said, "but I could have used more dessert." While we clapped and laughed, the ladies in shiny suits rolled the carts away and brought out a new one, packed with glass statues and forks and spoons and bits of metal junk. "Before I begin," Ramus said, "I must warn you not to try this at home. I can eat things that would choke and kill normal people. Do not try to copy me. If you do, you may die." He began eating. He started with a couple of nuts and bolts, which he sucked down without blinking. After a few handfuls, he gave his big round belly a shake, and we could hear the noise of metal inside. His belly heaved, and he spat the nuts and bolts back out. If there had been only 1 or 2, I might have thought he was keeping them under his tongue or the sides of his cheeks, but not even Ramus Two Bellies' mouth was big enough to hold that load. Next, he ate the glass statues. He crunched the glass up into small pieces before swallowing it with a drink of water. Then he ate the spoons and forks. He twisted them up into circles with his hands, popped them into his mouth, and let them slide down. He said his teeth weren't quite strong enough to tear through the metal. After that, he swallowed a long metal chain, then paused to catch his breath. His belly began rumbling and shaking. I didn't know what was going on until he gave a heave, and I saw the top of the chain come out of his mouth. As the chain came out, I saw that the spoons and forks were wrapped around it. He'd managed to poke the chains through the hoops inside his belly. It was unbelievable. When Ramus left the stage, I thought nobody could top such an act. I was wrong.